But for those of you that don't know Mark DeYoung or have maybe only seen him kicking around the race course, Mark's been a member of the national team for, am I going to say 19 years now, Mark? Gabe corrected me.
Yeah.
You've been on the team since before he was born. So
Alex mentioned that today. He's like, so how does it feel to be on the national team for 30 years? It's like, well, it's only like 19. But
yeah. But Gabe's
morning,
18, so he noted that you started your national team career before he was born. And then, I mean, ultimately, the highlight for Mark has been starting in 2009 as we really developed towards the 200 meters, bronze medal in London, silver medal in 2013. I don't remember where worlds were that year. I'm sorry, Mark. And then world champion in 2014-15. Germany. World champion 2014, 2015 in Milan. Mark's got a tremendous amount of experience. If you haven't seen Mark paddle, take the time to notice him at practices or in the future when we all get together. Or it's a pretty quick YouTube, and there's tons of videos of Mark out there and exploding off the start. So this conversation really, I want to kind of dial it in and around starts and maybe a little bit of the preparation period into the race. If you guys have questions, ask them. This is as informal as we can get, but that's it. Mark, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, guys, I just wrote some notes down, so there's nothing really set in stone here that I want to talk about. So if you feel like interrupting me at any time, do so, because I want to make sure I cover everything, and also able to talk about the things that you want to learn about too. So yeah, Kramer, I guess you introduced me well enough. Yeah, no, I've had a long career. 1,000 meters was my early days, 1,500s, and then as you said, 2009, the 200 meter program took off, and that's where my natural talents lay. So I was able to do that more seriously in the 200 and had some decent success doing that. So yeah, so 200 meters starts are obviously quite important. In fact, our former biomechanist guy, Mike Bavall, would say that there's basically a 90-something% correlation between who gets to the 51st and who wins the 200. So it's a big deal. I would say it's a big deal for any distance. It sets you up for a good race, and you're racing from the front instead of trying to catch up. So yeah, I basically figured I want to get to some of the more technical stuff, like what you actually do in the first few strokes. But there's a little bit of sort of groundwork before we get to that in terms of, wind and what you're doing in your warm up, physically, mentally, tactically, etc. So we'll get to the technical stuff, but I first wanted to kind of go back to the night before you might be at a big race. And what I always do is I go online, I check what lane I am, what heat I am, time, everything. I'm not going to get too much into the specifics of that, but mainly you want to go on Google Maps and actually check out where the race course is, what direction it's headed, and go on some weather app to figure out what the wind will be, what the wind direction will be. And then sort of in your head, you can picture that unfolding the next day. Are you going to be dealing with like a headwind, a tailwind, or is it going to be coming from the left, from the right? All those little details matter. And the more you know about what to expect, the less you're going to be wondering all night about the what ifs. So I found that really helpful. Just a little bit of homework the night before, really important. So yeah, basically the next day you leave the dock. I'm going to kind of go through a bit of the warm up stuff, and then you're into the start blocks, ready to start your race. So there's, the physical stuff. I'm sure you guys have all your warm ups figured out. For me, I always leave the dock 25 minutes before my race, because my warm up takes about 20 minutes, and it's the same warm up I always do. And it seems to work. But just, be aware that you're not making stuff up as soon as you leave the dock. You are sticking to a plan right from the get-go. It's not necessarily a race plan, but it takes a lot of mental load off you just knowing what to expect in those 25 minutes before your race, and puts you into a little bit more of a calm mindset. So, I get through my warm up, and then the last thing I want to do in that warm up is just an all out sprint. Don't worry too much about the technique. I forget what we call it now. It's a term from a long time ago, but it basically will really spike your nervous system and make sure that you're firing on all cylinders before the race. So I do that last sprint at about between 5 and 8 minutes before the start. If the race gets recalled, you kind of have to figure out, if you're going to do another sprint or not. But you want to do it so that it's recent enough that your nervous system is still peaked, but not too soon to the start that you've started to tap into your creatine phosphate system, which is kind of like the jet fuel that gets you off the line with no real ill effects. So yeah, 5 to 8 minutes before is when I do that. In the warm up, it can be pretty overwhelming. This is like obviously a big deal. You're about to make your dream come true kind of thing. So you can have a lot of racing thoughts, and it's really important to conserve your energy because it takes a lot of nervous system load, mental load in the race, and you want to make sure that all those competitive juices are still there once you're on the line. So I did a lot of work with a mental performance coach where we did something called bio-neurofeedback, where you basically get to learn a lot about how you respond to stress and what thought patterns that you're going to think to control that. To basically on race day, more or less people are operating in a little bit of an anxious state, and you're basically trying to calm yourself down. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you may be trying to ramp yourself up a little bit. So it's important to just understand where you are on race day and what endpoint you want to get to, and then sort of adjust your mind accordingly. But we talk about basically 3 different modes mentally that you want to avoid or get into. So there's basically like busy brain waves, which are the highest firing frequency that take a lot of energy, high frequency, and that's basically anxiety. You don't really want to be anxious all day because that wears you down really fast. So then you want to basically go into a different zone that we call alpha. Alpha would be similar to kind of you're sitting around hanging out with friends, chatting, very light load, a little bit slower frequency, calm, cool, collected, but still like sharp, still aware of your surroundings, and ready to get into a really focused mind state. So yeah, after that 5 to 8 minutes, that's when it's time to start thinking about the race. And I should say, sorry, back into alpha, when you're, when you're just finished a piece and you're sort of sitting there thinking, you might want to just think about your breathing. For me, the whole the breath type thing is a little bit mystical and weird, but basically, instead of having a bunch of thoughts, you want to just focus on one. And that will basically, drop all the extraneous thoughts to the wayside. So meditation, I guess, is something you could practice outside of race day, but it's essentially picking one thing. It could be, it could be a spot on the table. It could be looking at your own hand. It could be anything, but just one thing that you're focused on. And that will kind of strip away all the excess thoughts. Breathing is handy because you're always breathing. So it's a thing that's always with you that you can focus on. And I think that's why focusing on the breath is such a big deal, just because it's always with you. So yeah, in that pre-start, you're trying to stay cool, and in order to do that, you might have to just cool down, focus on your breath, and try not to think too much. Honestly, you'll build in enough time to go through your race plan in the next few minutes. So You get your 5 minutes to start, and you're going towards the start line. You're kind of in the start area doing a couple little like really light GA1 things if you want to, just to stay loose. But really, you're not trying to crank out any sort of effort, because you want those creatine phosphate stores in your muscles ready to go. And at that point, it's a good time to start to think about the race plan a little bit. So for me, racing at 200, it's not straightforward. It's actually quite hard because there's so little room for error. But there's a start. It's its own thing. That's the hardest part of the 200, and that's a whole bunch of little things coming together really quickly. And then there's a cue that I think about at the 50, a cue that I think about at the 100, and a cue that I think about at the 150. And then obviously the finish if I choose to shoot the boat or whatever. But at that stage, yeah. So you're starting to come out of alpha. You're looking into beta, which is it's a more narrow focus. You hear about tunnel vision, which is you're kind of getting into a bit of a tunnel vision. You still want to be obviously aware enough that you can hear the start gun go off, but that's it's a higher energy state, but you're not going to be in it for that long. But think of maybe doing a Sudoku or reading a book or something. Maybe it's really noisy around you, but you're still able to keep up with the book, and you're locked into the thing. It's sort of that same feeling of being locked into a thought, and in a simple word, focused. So you're getting up to the start line, you're going through that race plan, whatever those cues are, you're running through it. So I like to run through it maybe a couple of times all the way through. And then it doesn't really help you to be on the start line thinking about 5 different cues. So at that point, you run through it all the way through, and then you go through each one. So I like to pair the cues in terms of, first stroke, what happens there, 5 strokes in, what happens there. So you're kind of creating a memory chain where you're thinking of 2 thoughts. One is first stroke, next stroke. And then the next thought might be, second stroke, 5th stroke. And then that might turn into 5th stroke, 50, and then 50, 100. So each thought transitions into the next one, and you don't have to worry that you're going to miss out on, well, I don't know what I'm going to do at the 150 because I'm only thinking about that first stroke. So you get through that, and then, when it's time, you're sitting on the line thinking about that one stroke. And that's where I'll kind of delve into a little bit more detail. But so, you're on the line, you get called into the blocks, and you've done your homework. You've experienced what the wind is doing. Important thing. So how do you know which direction the wind is blowing? You can obviously look at the waves. You see maybe there's a calmer side or not. One thing I found really useful is if you're sitting still, you just turn your head. You keep turning your head, and when you hear the wind in both ears, that's the direction the wind is coming from. You should realize that not always is the wind behaving at the water surface. It could be blowing in a little bit of a different direction, a couple feet up, and you're going with your head, sort of scanning. As soon as you hear it in both ears, you kind of lock into that, and you can dial in a little bit that direction. Based on what that direction is doing, you're going to either be pointing, left or right. So you get your boat in the boot, the front of your boat's not moving. And the wind is always going to kick out the back of your boat. If say it's coming from the right, it's going to kick the back of your boat out to the left. So if the wind is coming from the right, it's going to steer you toward the right. So let's just go with the example of wind coming from your right. You're in the boot. You're going to want to point a little more than normal to the left. So I start on the left. So if there's no wind, I want to point a little bit to the left, because that first stroke is going to bring me to the right. And that first stroke sort of changes direction the most. As you get going faster and faster, you have different pressures on the boat, which keep you a little straighter. Your rudder is also effective because there's a flow going over it. So that first stroke, I start on the left. I usually point like 0 wind to about the 75 meter buoy on my left. If there was a big right wind, I would point maybe even to the 50-meter buoy on the left. If there was a left wind, I would straighten out a little more. So I might be pointing to like the 100-meter buoy on my left. Really strong left wind, maybe even like straight, knowing that the wind is going to push me around to the left as I get going. So that's why wind is important. You want to do your homework before, figure out what, where am I going to be pointing on that start, not making stuff up on the day. So I'd encourage you to try to see with zero wind where you're going to normally point and set that as your baseline for when you straighten out, and then correct as necessary based on which way the wind is blowing. So like I said, lots to think about on the start, but you have to put in a lot of reps to do it. And it's actually surprising that a lot of people, they want to get better at their starts, but you ask them what they do and they don't do starts that much. So I'm a big advocate of, if you want to get better at the thing, do the thing. And I have my own techniques on a start. They work for me, they still work, but it doesn't mean that you guys have to do that. You have to figure out what's going to work for you, and the only way to do that is to actually experiment and see what works best. So okay, where are we now? Pre-start. So yeah, I'll get into a bit more of the details on the start. I should say there's basically two different approaches that people take on a start. Two videos you might want to look at. If you want my approach, look at a video of me. That's a little bit more start in a small gear, rev it up high, and just get going, really fast. It might kind of look spinny, but there's shorter strokes, they're faster strokes. And as I get up to speed, I'm hitting into a bigger gear, sort of like you would in a car. And then an example of the opposite of that would be you start in a pretty big gear and you're putting these big heavy strokes in, and then those strokes get faster. A good example of that would be Max Beaumont. He takes these big old heavy strokes on the start. So choose which one you want. They both work. For me, I like my approach better. My reasoning is that I can get the strokes off way faster if I just have shorter, faster, more explosive strokes. So, okay, we're going with the right wind example. I'm pointing, more toward the left than I normally would because there's this right wind blowing me over. But the wind keeps blowing me straight. So I need to keep pulling my boat over to the right. And I have a left fixed grip. So that's where I'm holding the tape on my paddle and it's not moving. And so I'm drawing on my right. And when I'm not drawing, I'm sitting with my right blade feathered on the water. And I have it feathered because when they call ready, I don't want to be taking a scoop of water up to ready like this. That's a lot of weight being pulled outside of my boat and it's going to tip the boat sideways. So that right blade is feathered, it's light, it's ready to smoothly go up in the air. And all my corrections, if it's right wind, will just be on the right. If I had to push the boat forward, I'll do it on the right. But before every start, I will take one stroke with my left into the boot to make sure that my hand is sitting on the shaft in the right spot. I've had races where I start and the blade is, instead of being here, it's a little bit rotated. And that just kind of slices through the water. So I'm not making that mistake again. Every start I do, I'm taking a nice stroke into the gate and I'm making sure that blade feels nice and square in my hand. Sitting there, my right blade feathered on the water. My left hand will be as close as possible to where I want it on my start when I actually set up for ready. So that happens to be right above my left knee. I'm just kind of resting my hand right above my left knee. And when my hands go up, my left hand barely moves at all. So you're trying to minimize all movements on that ready because you have to tip and then your balance is off when they say go, right? A really smooth start is a lot better than not a smooth start. So yeah, sitting there, feathered right hand, knee on the thing and waiting. You're in that beta state, thinking about your first cue. So we've done some research, me and Bryce and Alex, on what should we be paying attention to. Are you looking dropping? Are you looking at if they have a light? Are you looking for that light to flash? Well, it turns out that it takes longer for your brain to process light cues, like visual cues, than it does auditory. So if each lane has a speaker, you're listening for an audible cue. So you're waiting. As soon as you hear the horn, you go. And you know, we did a whole bunch of work on a kayaker to figure that one out, but that turned into my cue as an audible one. But yeah, you're waiting there. You're thinking about the first stroke you're about to take, and that's basically it. And when that audible cue happens, you're taking that first stroke. That's all you have in your mind. You already did that sort of sequencing your race plan. You don't have to worry about what's happening on the 50 until you're almost at the 50. So, you know, ready, set, go. Go happens, drops, and you go off. I'm set up usually just sort of a neutral arm. I don't know if you can see this, but it's not bent. It's not hyperextended. My shoulders are pretty much square, but my arm is sort of relaxed, neutrally out. I keep my hand, my top hand. I used to have it sort of here with the bent arm. Now I have it here more or less with a straight arm, sort of right over my other hand. I find if you're across like this, then the direction of the blade is going out and the front of your boat turns over. So to have it a little straighter, you can put one hand basically straight over the other one, and that's a really linear stroke that's going to make the boat move forward. Other thing, so I don't bend my top arm that much. I looked at a lot of video of my starts, and on the first frame of the video, my bottom hand doesn't move, but my top hand does that. So if nothing happens before I punch out, that's another 0.2 seconds that is wasted. So I basically just do away with that bent arm to straight arm part of the stroke and start with a straight arm. Treat it more like a hinge, sort of like an oar lock on a rowing boat. And you're holding it still and yanking on the bottom arm. The first stroke, I don't think of as being one isolated stroke. I think of the first two strokes being one stroke. Sounds kind of weird, but I think in terms of more like a 1-2 punch where you'd kind of jab and then throw this straight. The first stroke is kind of that jabs up the bigger second stroke, and the top arm comes down, and as soon as it's down, you're taking the stroke. There's nothing. It's just smoothly transitions right into the second stroke. And from there, you know, smoothly transition into a really strong third stroke. For me, I have some power, so by the third stroke, I'm moving fast enough that I can crank it like immediately after that. So it's usually, you know, those first three strokes, each one is unique and different, and then, you know, stroke 3 onward is you just blast the rate, try to get to the 50th possible, and you know, you're off to the race. So, you know, that's probably not for everyone. Maybe you take 5 strokes where each stroke gets a little bit longer, and then your rate is cranked and you're going. But I will say, like, don't get too cerebral about it. You still have to think about going really hard and being really aggressive. I'm sure you could have not the perfect start, but if you're focusing on trying to win the first 50, you're probably going to do better than having this perfect start where you're a little bit too in your head, and, you know, not thinking about being uber aggressive. So like I said, lots of details. So the best thing you can do is to practice until it becomes kind of second nature. There's this, you know, the saying, practice makes perfect. Well, perfect practice makes perfect. And if every piece you do, you're just sort of getting the piece, and, you know, that's practice makes perfect. It's making you better. But if you can go through that sequence every time you do a start, where you're thinking about those first few strokes, your direction, you're imagining some horn going when the gate drops, then that's something, that's a habit that you're ingraining every time. And you want to be ingraining these habits instead of ingraining, bad habits or complacency. And about all the alpha waves, beta waves, etc. But at some point, you have to translate that into actually, real life and what you're doing. And the best way I find to do that is just to actually do it every opportunity you get. So when you show up on race day, you're not necessarily, breaking down into all these little granular layers of what's happening on a start. You just flow through it, and you're very much used to that. So yeah, just 25, 50. Yeah. So I guess the best thing you can do at that point, how do you evaluate whether it's good or not? Like, am I doing what Mark Young does? Am I doing what Beaumont does? I wouldn't judge it based on that, because everyone is different. They have strengths and weaknesses. But I wouldn't get too caught up about how you feel, because if races feel too good, then you probably haven't gone hard enough, or you haven't, rang that towel out to get every little ounce of energy out of you. So I wouldn't expect comfort or a perfect gliding feeling. What you're really interested in, like any race, is whoever gets from the start line to the finish line first is the winner, right? However you do that is up to you, and that's all that matters. So, look at video. You see some sort of objective measures that you can have to know if this is fast or not, even if it feels good. We use GPS, which shows us, our acceleration. One parameter we look at is velocity at 5 seconds. So, 5 seconds after you start, if you have a higher velocity, that means you've accelerated faster, and that you would count that as a good start. So, you get your good start. Okay, what did I do in that? Try to get a sense of what just happened, and you can tease out, what works best for you. I think I basically covered, a lot of info here that I could go into more detail on. But that's how I do it. I'll answer some questions. I saw there was some chat. I just can't really see that.
Yeah, I'll read them out there, Mark. Eric is asking if you count strokes when you race and throughout the race. Are you counting?
It's a nasty habit. I try not to. I don't have a coach a lot of the time, so a lot of times I get used to counting strokes to see how long the piece is. If it's a windy day and we're not able to go on the course, I'm counting about 45 strokes for 100, and that's my way of doing it. But I find, like I said, it takes a focus off aggressive, fast, high rate strokes, and you're in your head a bit too much. So I would do it to figure out the quality of each stroke. So stroke feel different than stroke 2 and 3 and stroke 5. So get a feeling of what number those strokes are supposed to feel like. Sorry, how those strokes are supposed to feel at each number. But then I wouldn't be counting strokes. That's definitely not in a race. You got bigger things to think about than that. In my opinion, if it works for you, obviously do what you need to do, but have some evidence to back that up.
And we've got another question in there from Gabe. Gabe, I'm sure was soaking up all the information on how to angle the boat. That was a topic of conversation earlier in the week. But he's asking now about what part of the stroke or what part of the start call do you set up on your first stroke? So, sort of in that ready, set, go moment, where are you going from that relaxed, feathering on the right side to actually setting up your stroke?
So relaxed feathering on the right side. If you want to get really granular, you can wait, and you kind of know when they're about to say ready, because you'll hear the speakers buzz. They kind of turn on, they go, meh. And that's when okay, something is about to happen here. I still don't do anything there. I'm still just feathering, but I know at least at that point, I'm not going to take a big draw stroke to the right if my boat is slightly off, because I know they're about to call the start. But I'm just sitting there feathering, hand sort of just above my left knee. When they call ready, I wouldn't be too abrupt about it, because they're not going to say ready, set, go. But I call ready, and very smoothly, slowly raise your hand so that your boat is still stable, and then set, go. But yeah, basically on the word ready, I would start moving towards the start position.
Sounds good. Anybody else? Some specific questions out there?
Yeah, Mark, Ryan here. What does your breathing look like on the start and then the first couple strokes, or can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my breath is like held. I wouldn't like advocate that, but maybe it's a good thing. Your core needs to be pretty stiff to blast off the line, and I think as a result of things just being stiff, you're holding your breath a little bit. Honestly, it's not a thought that enters my mind until about the 75, where I'm like, okay, we're in it for the long haul now. Turn into cruise control. So I couldn't honestly say. But yeah, I would probably say it's probably more like I'm sipping air versus gulping it. And it makes sense. Like in the first 50, 75, you don't need air. You're, like I said about the creatine phosphate, that's your fuel that not do anything. That's to make sure it's there ready. That's your anaerobic alactic system. So there's no real problem having going really hard right off the line if you've rested enough beforehand. And from then on, it turns into the anaerobic lactic system, which is no fun. But you'll breathe when you need to. I guess that's my answer to that. Your body will find a way. Definitely in a 500, there's a cue to breathe. Like you can forget, and you want to make sure you get into an aerobic most carrying too much lactate around. But the 200, yeah, probably 75, I start to notice my breathing starts to.
There's another quick call or question from Erica. At what point do you start feeling that lactate, that heavy burning feeling in your race, or do you even notice it while you're racing?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's lactate or nervous system, but you turn into Gumby at about the 125, 150. And yeah, your body just feels like mush basically. So my cue at the 150 is usually just keep the rate up, keep the strokes hammering at the same rate. And that kind of gets you through like the don't worry about the Gumby phase. If you looked at video, you'd still look pretty strong, but you don't feel that at all. You feel like you're just turning into mush.
I've got one last question, unless anybody else has anything else. Mark, Andrea, Gabe, Erica, and Brianna on this call are on their way over to Sega next week. You've raced at that course a number of times. Any like little piece of advice on, or maybe favorite memory of a race course there, something that we want to cue in on as we head over?
Trying to think. I guess we're not going to the hotel with the water slides, eh? That's a good memory.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the Waterside Hotel.
No. Yeah, Segment's a good course. Like it should be pretty warm there compared to here, so you're gonna have warmer water. It'll be faster. It'll feel, especially if there's a tailwind, it's just gonna feel good and fast. K4 2019, yeah. I've had a lot of good races there, and I'm excited to race there because it does feel fast, and it is, especially like more into the summer. But there's a good return lane. You can come at 1,000, finish your warm up, and come back down to the 200. There's probably not this year, but there's usually a huge crowd there, and that's a big bonus to be excited about as a kayaker that doesn't have a lot of fanfare. The Hungarians always have a huge crowd with the guy drumming and stuff, so those are good memories. Hopefully they're able to do that still, but we'll see.
Actually, I just had a question.
Yeah.
How early, like starter calls 5 minutes, when are you putting your nose in the block?
Oh, that's one note I had. Try to be the last person to put your nose in the block. That's usually, well, they call, 3 minutes to start, and then they call 1 minute. So it's at 1 minute to start. They expect you to start getting your nose into the boot. But it's no fun to have your nose in a boot and just waiting for people to come to the start line. So be that person that people are waiting on, and don't be so late that that the official's going to call you forward or anything. But you're probably in the boot for 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the situation. But you all kind of come up together, and I would just try, up to you, but I would avoid trying to be the first one there, because then you're just correcting on the start line. You haven't taken like a real stroke in a while, so that, where I said the shaft could rotate, you just have a longer time where you're trying to figure out where your hand is on your paddle and stuff. And yeah, I'd stick to, minimal time. I don't really know exactly how long that would be though.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Mark, I want to be conscious of your time, and I'm sure you've got a workout or something to figure out here. I know you guys are going through some tough days in Nova Scotia with that lockdown, but I really do want to thank you for taking a little bit of time and chatting with us here. Most of you guys on this call will see Mark around, or he's on group chats that you're on for the team. And if not, if you got further questions or want to poke his brain, ask questions. He's always keen for answers. I know, Mark, you've shown an interest in the past in different adaptations and things that athletes are using and stuff like that too. So nice, smart guy. Don't be shy to ask questions, soak up the information. Really, really appreciate your time, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
So yeah, feel free. Like, obviously this stuff is better described in person. So next time we're together, just reach out. I'm a little bit of an introverted guy, so I'm not going around shaking hands or anything, but I'd be happy to take you up on anything if you ask for it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
guys.
Thanks so much,
care.
Mark.
Thanks.